What makes humans strong, healthy, and happy? You won't find the answer in a commercial or advertisement. No, it's not the latest iPhone, the newest car, line of clothing, or a meal deal from McDonald's. It's not the latest gadget to make your home more comfortable or clean without you even having to lift a finger, and it's definitely not thousands of social media likes or followers. The science says comfort is not the answer. The answer is discomfort. In Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis, he discusses how our sheltered, temperature-controlled, overfed, underchallenged lives are the leading cause of many of our most urgent physical and mental health issues. Now, over the last year, I've been on a journey. Since reading Easter's book, I've been on a journey to better myself, to become mentally stronger by pursuing discomfort, and in particular, a massive challenge. The Kerry Way Ultra, a 120-mile run across Ireland's toughest terrain in under 40 hours. And my journey is the subject of today's episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast. Welcome, my name is JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my co-host and friend, and today my interviewer, Nate Sanderson. In 2017, I started TOC Culture Consulting and this podcast with the intent to help coaches and leaders across the world grow to become better leaders and build better team cultures. Each week, this podcast shares practical ideas, tools, and methods to become a better leader and build a better culture. If you want to go deeper than this podcast, may I suggest that you check out my latest book, The Culture System, a proven process for creating an extraordinary team culture. I guarantee you it will be one of the best, if not the best book you have read on team culture to date. Learn more at tocculture.com, where you can also learn more about the services and coaching we provide for leaders and coaches all across the world. Now, for my interview with Nate Sanderson.
Well, this week on the podcast, I'm pleased to be joined by my co-host, JP Nurbin, who's going to talk a little bit about a life experience that he had here recently when he ran the ultra marathon, the Kerry Way. And for those that are not familiar with the race, which is probably most of you, JP traveled 120 miles in less than 40 hours. He actually finished the race in 37 hours over some of the most difficult terrain in Europe, including over 20,000 feet of elevation that he climbed on this race. And JP, I know we're going to get into a little bit of what the race was like, what your training was like, but I think what most of our listeners want to know is, what the hell were you thinking?
That's the question, Nate, that people were asking me still afterwards. Even my wife was still like, what exactly, why did you want to do that? But it kind of comes back to three things. And I think at a very simple, basic level, like my initial interest in the Kerry Way was the fact that it's in a really beautiful place in Ireland. And it's actually a very kind of sentimental place. It's kind of where my wife and I fell in love. When we first started dating, we went down there and we were actually hiking parts of the trail, not all 120 miles of it, but we were hiking parts of it. And so it always had some significance. And I had brought my kids back there for certain hikes. And I learned that there was this Kerry Way, this 120-mile loop, and it was like a 9-day hike is what they recommend, 9 to 10 days. But then I came across this run that was done in less than 40 hours. And my initial reaction was like, oh my gosh, how could anybody do that? Like, that sounds impossible. But then kind of the second thing happened, which was a little bit over a year ago. I read the book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. And it's a great book that covers a lot of different topics. But at the core of it is about how in today's society, we're constantly seeking pleasure and comfort, and that's leading to a crisis. Many crises, one of those being the mental health crisis. Like many people during COVID, mental health, mental wellness was a challenge and a struggle for me. It's always been kind of an up and down struggle and challenge for me since even like high school days. And so when I read Easter's book, I was kind of encouraged by one of the concepts he presented in the book, which was this idea of a Misogi. And it's this ancient kind of ritual where people go out and do really, really hard things. They do some enormously huge task or challenge. And, there's kind of two main criteria that Easter lines out in the book. And the first is that there's a 50% chance of failure, in this task or challenge. And the second is don't die. Right. And so looking at it, I said, all right, I don't think I'll die in this. And I really honestly going into it to run that long, that far, and not being a runner. I would typically run maybe 5 kilometers, which is about 3 miles. Like, really want to go over that. I said, okay, this is it. This is a challenge that I'm going to go after that I'm just really not sure if I can complete. Really, for me, that reason to seek out this discomfort, honestly, at many points, suffering and sacrifice, was because I wanted to change my mindset. I wanted to stop seeking pleasure around every corner, like instead seek out discomfort, because I looked at the research and and recognized that would make me mentally stronger. Like, I think mental health, I was really tired of treating mental health. Like, you have, go through a rough patch in life and it's like, okay, we treat the symptoms. Or for me, it was like, why don't I start training this? Why don't I start actively investing in this and going out and doing this Misogi and all the things that would lead up to this? That was the intent, to make myself mentally stronger. And I'd say that the deeper reason that he evolved towards the end of this, Nate, that I'll just touch on really quickly here, is that I started to recognize through this Misogi, it wasn't necessarily just going to make me mentally stronger, hopefully. It was going to change me. It was going to transform me, through this experience of suffering and pain for an extended period of time. And I share that not because I was unhappy or unhappy with who I am, but I'm constantly searching, striving, and working to just be the cliche best version of yourself. Just to be better. And for me, this just seemed like a challenge. This suffering, this could be the thing for me this year in 2022. And so those are kind of like the three big reasons why I went after this big challenge.
Well, as we talked about your experience kind of getting ready for this podcast, you've mentioned it's kind of the story of two journeys. One is to get yourself to the starting line and the preparation. And then the second is to get yourself to the finish line. And before we get into some of the details there, I'm just curious as to, you mentioned you ran, but you wouldn't necessarily consider yourself a runner, I don't think, prior to this undertaking here. What were some things that JP was maybe a little bit naive about as he started to prepare for this race?
It's funny. Like, literally, I ran a marathon in 2017, and I did a bit of the training that you're supposed to do for a marathon. But on the day, it was an easy marathon in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, very flat terrain. I came out, the energy was going, and I ran hard. And I hit a wall, and I was really messed up. Like, I was cramping halfway through the marathon, like full body cramping, and it was miserable. I somehow managed to finish under 4 hours, but I said, I will never run another marathon again, like, ever. It's like, this is the worst experience of all time. So here I'm going to go run and try to run like 4.5 marathons. The funny thing is, I somehow I forgot everything. I didn't just forget the pain of that marathon. I forgot all about like, don't start out too fast, like, work on your nutrition, your diet. But for me, one of the biggest naive things was I just said, okay, if I'm going to run 120 miles, I probably just need to go run a lot. Like, that's the key, and at the end of the day, yes, you need a lot of mileage in your training to be able to pull this off. There's no doubt about that. That's probably like the number one factor. As you start to dive into what this challenge actually entails, you think the biggest challenge is 120 miles. It's not. It's 20,000 feet of incline. Okay, you think that's the next biggest challenge? Not really. It's sleep deprivation. You don't go to sleep. Like, you're on your feet for almost 40 hours in my case, running, moving. It's, think, okay, you got to take in calories. Well, you don't feel like eating. You literally physically, sometimes you can't keep food down. It's so hard to eat. Is you're running in the dark in Ireland, in a place with very little light pollution. One of the darkest places in the world, actually, at that time of year. It's known for that. And you're running on top of mountains. There's rain, there's hail. And like, in Ireland, when you get wet, you don't dry out. Like, there's not really a drying period. It's just always constantly wet here. So, I mean, once you're wet, like, for the next, 5 hours until you can get to a checkpoint and maybe swap out some clothes. So It's all the elements that go into that type of run that actually make it really hard. Oh, and I forgot about that navigation. Like the trails are not well lit or marked, especially in Ireland. So it's very easy to get lost.
Why don't you walk us a little bit through kind of the game plan as you put together, your path to being prepared? I mean, you mentioned getting a lot of miles in, but there's obviously more to it than that. And particularly with those challenges, as you started to think through the route a little bit more and what that experience was going to be like, how does somebody prepare for running at night and trying to navigate trails that may or may not exist? And what was that process like for you?
Most of our listeners know I love books. So obviously I picked up a book and just started to read about training methods and things to do and getting training plans. Like the night challenge was one that I was like, I had started to go running at night. Like I would just like, and it's very dark here in January and February. It gets dark around 3:30 in the afternoon in Ireland. So it's pretty easy to go practice running in the dark, so you would just go practice running in the dark, get your headlamp, put that on. But I remember one funny story. And it was like, there's a mountain in the Wicklow Mountains, which are close by to where I live in Ireland, just south of Dublin. And I went out, I said, I'm going to go for a night run, 4 a.m. And I checked the forecast and it's like, no rain, right? So I'm like, oh, this is great, right? I'll go at 4 a.m., go up the mountain, about three miles up, 3 miles down. And so I go out there in the morning at 4 a.m. and there's a little drizzle going on. And I'm like, okay. At this stage there, I have not learned about gear, right? I don't know about anything about rain jackets, waterproof rain jackets. I've got a long sleeve hoodie on, or like light hoodie type thing on, and a pair of shorts. And I go running up this mountain in the dark with my headlamp, with my AirPods in, thinking I'm like all cool and stuff. And it goes really badly. Like the wind is the it's first off, it starts raining big time. It's just pouring. And then the wind picks up and it's got to be easily 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour in the top, to the point where I'm running on wooden plank and beams. And I'm like, if I fall off here, I might roll down the side of that mountain there. Like it's actually terrifying. But I'm telling myself, I have to overcome this, because if I can overcome this moment, then I'm pretty much won't run in the worst conditions possible. Right. Like if something happened, I lost my jacket, forgot my jacket, get hit by a rainstorm and, 60-mile-an-hour winds, okay, then I'll be ready for it on race day, it's because it can't get that bad in September, right? In Ireland. So I do it. I come back down the mountain and always like, it's like 9 o'clock, the sun comes out because it's Ireland. And at that time, and these two Irish runners pass me and they're just like, look at me and then they, hey man, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. He's like, where's your rain jacket? It's like, yeah, I'll have one next time, like it was just like this idiot, So you go out, you try to do really hard things that prepare you, not just put the miles in, but like I was running at night. Another one was like I was at the beach even this summer, and I was like, man, you're at the beach, for a few weeks during the summer with the family because we came back to the States, and I couldn't get any elevation. Like there's no elevation at the beach; it's all flat. So I just started running in the deep sand. And one day I took my youngest son, Connell, who's like 2, and I was pushing him in the stroller. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to run in the water. So the waves come up and I would just run in the water and my feet were completely soaked. You're pushing a jogger through like mud, but I'm like, this is some resistance training. And, my feet will probably get wet in Ireland. And sure enough, like on race day, like I think my feet were probably wet for like 25 hours, right? Like, but like I had built up myself up to be able to, it wasn't something new to me. And then I think my body was a little bit more prepared for it. So you just try to take on challenges as much as you can that you might see on the big day or days.
Now, related to that, you didn't just jump into the Kerry Way as your first, distance race longer than the marathon that you mentioned previously that you would run. You did a couple other races leading up to it. We actually wrote about kind of a little bit of your experience in the Wicklow Way in the newsletter a while back, and one of the things that I really appreciated about the approach to that race was, you hadn't run that far before, and you told me, I've got to run that far to see what breaks so I can learn how to fix it. Obviously, knowing you're going even beyond that distance when you get to the Kerry Way. So why don't you talk us through a little bit about, those 2 preliminary races that you ran and kind of what the lessons were from those experiences?
Well, honestly, Nate, the first run was a 50K, 50 kilometers, which is just a little bit over a marathon. It was running through the mountains, and it was a serious inclination, but I was running in Wicklow Mountains, which are kind of like my home mountains. So I went running there, and man, it could not have gone worse. I felt great the first half of it. Energy was going, and I was running way too hard. The heart rate was way above where it should have been. That's something I spent a lot of time studying, was heart rates, where it should needs to be at based upon my diet and stuff. So I'm usually trying to burn a lot of body fat when I run, but I ran way too hard, and all of a sudden, like halfway through, I start getting cramps. And then all of a sudden it's like a flashback to 2017 in my first marathon, except now you're climbing over rocks and that steep incline, and it's not flat ground. So it becomes really, really dangerous because you kind of need your quads to be able to stop yourself going down a mountain. And, I almost tapped out there because it was so incredibly painful and started to get unsafe, but I pushed through somehow to the end. It's like an 8-hour run. What happened afterwards was I got really sick. I had like severe muscle damage for like weeks. I couldn't even walk right. And at one point, I was actually, I tried to go golfing like, a week later with two of my friends, and they just like pulled me aside, like not like joking, like they pulled me aside and said, JP, like you got to kind of stop this. Like you're going to hurt yourself. Like this isn't good for you, man. Like this is like people aren't meant to run this far, right? So they really kind of came hard, like being trying to be the good friends and talked me out of this whole Kerry Way adventure. But that just only made me want to do it more now, because like I had to prove them wrong, right? But I learned there, about pacing, heart rate, and then also learned about stretching because I started to dive in and read all these, scientific journals around cramping and why we cramp. And long story short, there's not really a definitive answer. There's multiple reasons for that. And I kind of came down to two or three likely answers. One is, pacing, running too hard. Number two, stretching. And then number three, like not enough like sodium water imbalance in your diet. But stretching, I hadn't ever stretched prior to that stage. So then I started stretching for like a whole hour every day leading up to it. Which was funny because I remember reading David Goggins' book shortly after, and where he talks about his ultra journey and how he never stretched. And then he actually had a serious medical condition because he was running all these ultras without stretching. And he learned he needed to stretch as well too. He also shared in there that his first 100 miler was harder than all three of his Navy SEALs Bud selections trainings, and that might have scared me off had I not committed to it beforehand. But so I learned a lot through that first run on the Wicklow Way. But then really kind of going in, I was like, okay, what can I take and go into my second big run, which was 130 kilometers, so around 82 miles that I ran 2 months later, 2.5 months later. Obviously you up your work, your load and stuff like that. But as far as running load, but yeah, like you said, you just go in there saying, okay, I make my adjustments. What's not going to work there? You learn a lot of little different things I could go into on the technical things. But the biggest thing that I learned was like this pinnacle moment in the run where I'm halfway through. I'm probably like 40 miles in to this 82-mile adventure, and I am slowing down and I am struggling. I'm not necessarily going to quit, but I have this attitude of I'm just going to get through this. And if I don't, and then the thing about the tough part about that race was, or run, was like you have a lot of like checkpoints and you got to make these certain checkpoints. And one of these checkpoints, was 60 miles in, a little bit over 60 miles in, and you had to be there by a certain time. And I thought I was planning like I would still make it. Like I'm just going to do whatever I can just to get there in time. But then like the suffering and the pain is so like it's painful in your legs and you're tired and you're exhausted. And I had this moment in my head where I just said, why are you complaining? Like internally, I'm just like, this is horrible. This sucks. You're trying to go as slow as you can to minimize the pain in your legs. So you knew this was going to be hard. Like you knew this was going to be hard. So stop fighting it. Either if I'm going to continue to complain, I should just quit now. Like just quit, just stop. But if I'm going to keep running, then I'm going to run the run. And let's see how much pain I can take. Like the whole thing is to learn about yourself. And I needed to start embracing the pain and say, let's see how much of this pain and suffering I can take. And it completely flipped my mindset. And instead of like this, fight or flight response, like I just, it was this acceptance. And physiologically, my whole body changed. Like I literally just had this, it wasn't just an adrenaline rush. Like I was just operating better and I ran hard, like wasn't running out of control. I wasn't running too fast. It was running the run the way that I planned it. And I discovered this whole other source of like energy, that we have in there. Like I was tougher than I was giving myself credit for. And had I not done that, whatever had happened, a bunch of us had misgauged the checkpoint, and I only made one checkpoint by a minute, so I would have been like DNF, like they would have knocked me out of the race, had I not picked up my pace. But that learning from that experience was really a mental one, which is that you have to engage and embrace that suffering and that pain. And when we do that, there is like so much more capacity we have physically, mentally, emotionally as human beings. And so that was a huge learning. And it was kind of from a struggle, failure. I still finished the race, but there's definitely a game changer that would help me through my big run.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said there, just in general, whether you're scheduling opponents for your team or you're challenging yourself, physically, mentally, whatever it is, that when you establish a goal that seems maybe out of reach, like you almost have to have checkpoints of your own, and not necessarily just to prove that you can get there, but just to see, geez, I've never been here before. I don't know what to expect. I don't know necessarily what I have to be prepared for until I'm in a situation that's similar. And I think it takes it takes courage to take those bites before you take the whole meal, so to speak, when it comes to the whatever that giant challenge is. I'm curious, JP, as we move, kind of toward the race itself, and I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes there for, race day, and thinking about, maybe the 48 hours before, and you're at the start line, and now it's happening, and you put all this time in, you put the miles in, you've learned all these things, what's that state of mind like as you're, just getting ready to start this race?
It's two big things happened that I think really helped me to be able to enter into the right frame of mind. The first is I read the book The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal, shortly before the big run. And we're going to have Kelly on the Coaching Culture podcast in our next episode, the next two episodes after this episode. And there she talked about, and it just made so much sense to me, when you're experiencing stress or challenge or difficulty, yeah, there's the fight or flight response, but we can also choose the right mindset, what she calls like the challenge response, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's exactly what I experienced in the Wicklow Way. So I think it helped, to really cement my mental game plan going into the run, which was, when it gets hard, you got to embrace it. Like you just got to use that stress, that challenge, that pain as actual fuel and energy to go harder or to continue to keep going, going hard. And that was the first thing. And the second thing was my best friend who I played basketball with in high school, but we've stayed connected. We've been best men at each other's weddings. He said, hey, I'm coming out and I'm going to crew for you. And so to have someone there to help support you at every checkpoint, not just from a logistical standpoint, but from a moral support, like a mental, emotional support, and somebody that I'm so close with, to have them part of that journey. It definitely impacted me. Like I don't, I it just, I looked forward to every checkpoint. I looked, into that moment that we would share together. And so that going into the run, though, I just had, knowing that he was going to be there with me, like that gave me a level of confidence for sure.
Why don't you take us through a little bit of, kind of the experience of the run itself? As we've talked, you were cautious about not going out too fast and really monitoring your heart rate and your initial energy levels. And I think we've mentioned before, you've mentioned to me before, you prefer to start slow and catch up to people rather than start fast and have people catch up to you. But as you're going through the race, tell us a little bit about what that experience was like.
So one of the cool things was around my race plan, I think that I did was, like I mentioned earlier, I would do a 5K or 3 miles, like a lot, right? Like that's just, I go out, I'm able to run and near our house through these, beautiful fields by a river, stuff like that. We're just really fortunate where we live. And so I do 5K like all the time. So 5K was easy to me. So, I'm running 200 kilometers, 120 miles here. And I said, all right, that's 45 Ks. So I brought a Sharpie marker, and every time I knock 5K down, I'd like tattoo my left arm and just like make a mark, right? So I was going in there mentally focused. I had, the process was one 5K at a time. And the goal was like, hey, can I get it under an hour? If I get it under an hour, then I can make it in 40 hours, right? 40 times, so that was it, right? So that was my mental game plan. But then also the other game plan was, like you said, start slow. Like I want to be the back of the pack. Most people are going to start too fast. Um, and then I like the feeling of passing people. That was another kind of key component of the plan. And I started towards the back of the pack for the first two checkpoints, but I had some challenges in that. One was, people say things that get in your head, like, and here I'm in the back with these two guys that are experienced mountain climbers, and they're not big in the ultra running, but they're in the mountain climbing. And they're like, yeah, did you know that nobody finished the Kerry Way Ultra last year that got to the second checkpoint after 7 hours? And here I am, like heading in around 8 hours. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, I guess I started too slow. And so you start to have these doubts creep in. But no, I stuck to the plan. But there was something I changed from the Wicklow Way to this run. And my 130 kilometer to 200 kilometer that I think was really important to me is every time I'd pass someone, rather than just doing like, hey, you're right, like, oh, okay, yeah, and then just move on. Like that's that kind of like the general courtesy, like, are you all right? I would stop and just say, hey, how are things going? Oh, and the guy would be like, oh, I'm struggling, or maybe I busted my knee. Like guys were blowing their knees out. Guys were, one guy in one run like broke his ankle. Like it's really treacherous terrain out there. So, I would stop and like, offer DP, or icy hot, and I'd offer them water. Hey, you need food. Like I was just checking on them, try to encourage people along the way. Um, you know, just stop and sit down with them, and just try to have a conversation around why they were running. So whereas before in the previous run, I was like, I'm running this by myself. It's my Misogi, and I don't want to talk to anybody, right? Like I was in my own little shell. And here I tried to make it more of like a social thing, way to connect with other people in their moments of suffering. And that would fuel me every time you'd have that conversation with someone. That was a fuel, like it would propel me, further into the run for sure.
Well, we've talked so much, JP, about your preparation, doing the previous races, trying to experience things you haven't experienced before, and yet you'd never gone 200 kilometers before. Was there anything that you ran into on the race itself that wasn't expected, that you had to navigate yourself through?
Yeah, we had a lot of little things that came up. Like first off, you just don't know how your body's gonna respond to food, and once you start to reach these distances and stuff like that, and you obviously modify your diet from run to run. So there's things like that, but it was actually kind of funny. Like probably one of the more beautiful scenic parts of the journey, and you're on the side of this mountain and you're overlooking the ocean, and it's like really clear ocean there. It's kind of like the Caribbean, like you can see the bottom, but I'm 300 meters up into the air, on this, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And I like stop, I take a picture, and I'm smiling, and I think even like sent Melissa a message, just oh, this is so beautiful. And literally 5 minutes later, this is Ireland because you get like 4 seasons in an hour. All of a sudden, like these storm clouds come in, the wind picks up. It's probably 60 to 70-mile-an-hour winds. There's hail coming down. It's coming into my eyes. I have to jump into a ditch, right? And like hide out there for a couple minutes. But instead of like being like afraid or anything like that, I was like, let's freaking go. Like, here we go. Like, this is going to be a great story. Like this is awesome. And I kind of carried that mindset through every challenge that came my way. Like my phone broke, right? At shortly after because it got wet, even though it's supposed to be waterproof. It's probably just not supposed to get hit with a hailstorm. And so here I have no phone, and my battery in my watch is dying, which has my map. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get lost. But I'm like, okay, what can I do? And you just focus on the next thing. I can always make sure I can see someone, and if I lose somebody, I'm going to sprint to the next person and find them. But like, because they probably hopefully won't get lost. But you just kind of experience all these challenges throughout. My buddy John, he missed a checkpoint. He overslept. I had to run 10 miles on just like a little bit of water. And I was like, let's go. Here we go. Another challenge. Like every challenge that kind of came my way, Nate, that I wasn't expecting, I just kind of embraced it and leaned into it. And that type of mindset, I think was critical for me to finish, like, with the time that I ended up finishing with, which I never expected to have. I'll even add this one last challenge. I mean, it's kind of funny, kind of headed into the last quarter of the run. the sun finally comes out and it's really actually getting hot now. And I'm probably getting sunburned because I didn't bring my, sunscreen with me. But at this point, it's like, it's still so wet and mucky that you're running through like cow manure and sheep manure through these farms and these fields. And so now you're like, I almost lost my shoe twice, but it's just like, once again, it's just like, here we go, more challenges. But it's all right. I'm going to get to this next checkpoint. I'm going to change my shoes. So I get to this like last checkpoint, and who's there? But my wife, Melissa, drove up the three kids, which is about 3.5 hour drive, which it's not an easy drive with three kids, that's for sure. But she did it, and they were there and surprised me. And they helped me get all cleaned up and toweled me off and put on dry socks and dry shoes, which was a real big mistake because my feet have been sitting in water pretty much for 25 hours and were so tender that I had built up some blisters, but they just tore off. And so like I spent the last 25 kilometers just running with pretty much bloody feet. And it was just like, oh, here we go. Like it's just, so it was always just trying to embrace the challenges. I never really got rattled at any stage of the journey. I don't think.
So what was that like crossing the finish line? I mean, all this work and all this time, and you go through all these challenges, and that moment when you did finish, what was that like?
My friend John just kind of like turned to me and he says, "You did it." And I said, "No, we did it." Like that's just like there was such a sense of a team accomplishment. And I turned to my wife and I turned to the kids, and they ran the last mile and a half with me. And the last year has been a lot of sacrifice on everybody's part, because you're out running and you're doing all this training, and everybody's had to make some sacrifices, not just me. And it's been that kind of that joint effort. It was emotional. I did cry a little bit, but it was more like just this joy. I had spent the last 20 to 25 kilometers running with, bloody feet, but I was in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I had three healthy kids, a wife, and my best friend there on the finish line. And there's just mountains are swallowing you. They're just so incredibly beautiful, and the sun's out. And I really just, that was my gratitude run. If I can be grateful in this moment, of this moment of, physical pain and suffering, then maybe the next time something even tougher comes my way, I can find that. So when I crossed that finish line, there was a great sense of satisfaction, but also gratitude for all the things, because I had been literally dwelling and meditating on that, as well as the enormous amount of pain in my feet the last 4 hours.
Well, so many, when they talk about ultra marathons and doing, they're crazy events, JP. I don't know how else to describe it here, but they talk about how they're different at the end than they were at the beginning. We'll have Jason Caldwell, who's rode across the Atlantic Ocean a couple of times, on the podcast coming up here in the next month or so, and he talks about how it's a different Jason Caldwell that gets out of that boat every time, at the end of those races. So as you look back, and you mentioned part of this is about becoming the best version of JP that you can. How do you feel like you're different now on the other end of it than you were when you started this whole journey?
There's a lot of I'll give you three things. One is there's a lot of little things in my life that you have to make changes in to be able to accomplish this type of thing. And then it comes to the way you eat. For me, alcohol, like cutting back on drinks like that, and sleep, more commitment to sleep. Like sleep's so important. So like a lot of personal disciplines have built up over time over the year. So there's obviously that benefit there. The second thing is that I no longer seek comfort all the time. Like I think we were wired in today's society to constantly seek out, like, oh, when's my next vacation, or when can I get here and relax by the pool, and how can I minimize challenges in my life so that I have more downtime and more time to relax, because that's what I need. And my mindset's shifted. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I don't necessarily look forward to, like for me, it's not like sitting down and watching a show and eating a bowl of ice cream like at night or something like that. Like I actually don't even look forward as much this might sound bad to like vacations are not the highlight of my year. It's today. It's oh my gosh, right? I've got to put three kids to bed here, and I got this challenge here. I got to get done, by 8 o'clock because I got some extra work. But it's like it's embracing those moments and finding ways to be present and in those challenges. So I think I'm seeking more discomfort. I'm seeking more challenges. I'm embracing, not to use the word suffering too much, but the sufferings of life. The things that just come with life that are painful, stressful, challenging. I'm embracing those. And then the third thing after an event like that especially that last one, is, am I mentally tougher and stronger? Absolutely. Like there's very little I think that will shake me, and I still haven't found that thing that would break me and make me quit. Right, I haven't found that yet. But it's not the mental strength around being able to persevere that I learned this last run. I learned that in the one prior. Right, this one is around the mental strength for me to be able to seek out the support of others in moments of challenge and moments of struggle. And I have this predisposition, this personality that just wants to take it on, do it all myself. So for me, I think that's honestly a huge breakthrough. Is because I learned something about myself, and that not necessarily a good thing. Is that recognition that when things get hard, I try to take it all by myself. And if I was honest and a little bit vulnerable, that realization, that growth right there has made it all worth it, because that personality, which at the end of the day, it's great to be a guy that is all about taking on challenges, and no task is too great. There's some positives to that. At the end of the day, we need to be able to reach out for help, within people around us. This journey that we're on, whether it's our coaching journey, whether it's our journey within our family, our marriage, whatever journeys that we're on there, like it's never done alone. And if we try to do it alone, it's not done well, or as well as it could be. That for me is a huge learning moment, because I used to think strength was doing it alone. Like if I can do it alone without help, that says more about me as a man and a person. And now I recognize that that's backwards. That's backwards in a big way. End of the day, um, it's going to do amazing things for me as a husband and a father, for sure, and hopefully for me professionally as well.
Well, you survived your first ultra marathon, the Kerry Way. What's next? Are you going to look to do something else, JP? An annual challenge, or is this a one-off? What are your thoughts about a career, perhaps, in these type of challenging events?
After interviewing after interviewing Jason Caldwell, who we're going to have on the podcast in a month there, I don't know, I was like kind of inspired to start rowing across the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. But no, for me, I really enjoy, I enjoy running in nature. I really do. I like to get out there. But I mean, anything after like 2 hours, it starts to get either painful or boring or both, Um, and for me, I don't want to be great at ultra running. I could definitely see how it is appealing as a sport, but I definitely want to venture into other things. I really try to vary up my physical or exercise, different types of pursuits. So for me, I think I'm really focused a lot on yoga the next year, and I do have more ultras in the future. There's definitely, I'm already eyeing a few, probably none to the length of 120 miles in 40 hours, because that's kind of insane, Nate, to be honest with you, to go that long without sleep and being on your feet. So, great experience. Not to say I won't ever do one of that length, but definitely not in the plan yet.
Well, JP, we'll get you out of here on this. One of the questions we was posed in our community group me or community chat when we were getting ready for this interview. We said, "Hey, what are some questions you have for JP about this experience?" And somebody asked this question, which I thought was insightful: "Is would you recommend that everybody try to do some kind of physical challenge like this? Maybe maybe not 200K is probably not for everybody." But do you think there's value in every person that really wants to, I don't know if it's explore their limits or to improve themselves or even just to learn more about themselves, that they should take on at least one Misogi, as you learned that, use that term at the beginning, in their life?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't need to be a 200K. Absolutely. But I think there is value in having a challenge that you take on in the next year of your life. And it doesn't have to even necessarily be a physical challenge. Um, but the challenge to me, I think should have a risk of failure. I love that of the Misogi. and don't die. But I think that there's a third element that I would add to the Misogi, which is, it's going to require personal sacrifice and maybe a little bit of other people. But for me, the biggest sacrifices on me personally were giving up things that were really not things that provide a lot of value in my life or were meaningful. And what I mean by that is when I look at my life is going, do at the end of the day or at the end of the year, do I wish I did more of that? And if I can't say yes to that, then it's probably not very meaningful that I don't want to do more of it. And so that's how I identified things to cut back on. And so I could build in this time to do this training. So it could be trying to learn some language or try out for a play or musical or some other passion or dream that you might have had in your life. I don't know, it could be some great physical challenge as well too. It really is, not to be cliche, but it's the journey. It's the journey that leads up to it. And I really came to peace in the middle of the run. I wasn't before the run, but in the middle of the run, I said, I'm okay if I don't make it. I said, I'm okay if I don't make it. I'm not okay if I don't give this my best effort, though. That's all that mattered to me. Is I would give my best effort. I had done the journey. I put in the time. I had experienced the transformation that I wanted. And that I think that's what I think other people would experience if they were to take on a similar challenge like this. All right, that's it for Nate's interview of me. I hope today's episode maybe inspired you or at least jogged your interest in doing a challenge, a Misogi, or whatever you want to call it. If you have any questions for me, as always, my email is jpnurbin@tocculture.com. I'm happy to share and answer any questions that you may have. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. And also, please leave us a review and share it with other people out there.